and he has a very exciting presentation, A Tale of Two Depots. And we're looking forward to his presentation.
Here.
I appreciate that send-off, Anne Marie, so hopefully we'll have a little fun next few minutes. It's always good to be with other people interested in history. I'm interested primarily in railroad history, but as she said, tomorrow night I'll be at the Gwinnett County History Book Club meeting. So it won't be railroad history, it'll be a little different history. But anyway, I think everyone likes history, likes different parts and whatever, and so hopefully we'll have a good time together. And what I'm going to cover in this presentation, I'll show you some pictures I took in 1977 of our girls. We're going to call her that. We'll talk a little bit about depot operations, some things you might find in a depot, and then we'll talk a little bit about the two railroads that came here, and wrap it up a little bit on the when the depots were built, and maybe you can fill me in on some of those details. There seems to be some differences on the internet on when the depots were built, and so we'll talk about that a little bit. Maybe I can get your spin and get a little education for myself on that. So that's kind of the way we'll proceed. So I'm going to march on here. And 1977, April 9th, 77, I was out here, take a picture. Actually went in the Georgia Railroad Depot. That was actually the reason for the trip. Robert Hanson, Bob Hanson, a good friend of mine, he wrote the Georgia Railroad history book. And we got to go inside the Georgia Road Depot that day. So I took a picture there of the two depots. Of course, the Georgia Road on the right-hand side, and then the Central of Georgia. I call it Central of Georgia. At that time it was actually technically Southern Railway maybe, but that's on the left. You can see and I saw yours where you moved it. I was out there earlier today. You can see the train order mast on the front of the Central Depot on the left there, and we'll have a closer picture of that in just a moment. So that's our two depots. I'm in the morning looking towards the east there. Close up there, that Georgia Railroad Depot, and that's the way it looked at that time. Been nice to take a chainsaw to that street sign and that telephone pole, but that would probably put me in the pokey, so good thing I didn't do that. And then we have there the Central Georgia Depot, and that train order mast is the metal pole right in front of the bay window, and I clipped off the top of it in that picture. But that's what it looked like at that time, 1977. And that's the other side. And of course, the two depots, as you know, were not exactly across from each other, kind of offset a little bit like that. And Bob Hanson worked for the railroad, and he said the agents quite often would open up the door and holler at each other when they needed to, instead of picking up the phone, they just opened up the door and hollered at each other across the tracks. And I'm standing, as you can see the shadow there in front of the Georgia Railroad Depot to take that picture. So that's what they looked like back in 1977. So a little 40 years, that's right. It's kind of amazing, you know, especially when I keep getting bombarded right now with people wanting to sell me Medicare insurance.
You were only a teenager then. So
well, a little bit older, not much. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about depot operations and what you might find in a depot and the reason for a depot. I kind of made a little acrostic there, had to kind of change the words a little bit. People, operations, and things, the POT. That's the three things back in the day that a depot would do. You had moving people, passengers, you had train operations, you had things to do with the trains running, and then things, shipping of things, that's your freight. So those three things, we'll talk about that briefly just for the next few minutes. All right, people, age-old question. Is the train on time? When's it going to get here? You know, are we there yet? So you would have a passenger train bulletin board, something like that, usually on the front of the depot is where that would be located at. This is actually a replica of the Georgia Railroad bulletin board that used to hang in Social Circle. And my son actually built this replica based on the actual one from Social Circle. I've got a picture which maybe at the end, if we have time, I'll show you Rutledge Depot, and that's very similar signs on the front of Rutledge Depot. So that would be outside to help answer those questions. You know, is train on time? And when's it going to get here? And so on. So that's a very common thing, and oftentimes you find it outside the depot.
Note that it says it's on time if the crew is sober.
one of our members put the chalk stuff on there, and he puts a few comments like that on there. So, yeah. Normally he would, it wouldn't have comments quite like that probably on the real one. Yeah, that kind of add a few things. Also, if you know railroads, look real quick. Nick mixed up the distance, the direction of trains. Trains always go, the numbers go even one direction, odd another. He's got it mixed up on there if you look real close. So, but he actually went in and got some date times and whatever, and came up with some on Southern Railway, but Nick did mix them up as far as north and southwest and eastbound. But that's actually outside, hangs out outside of our depot at the Southeastern Railway Museum in Duluth. So that's where that's actually located now. This is inside the depot there, the Southern Railway Depot that we have there in Duluth. And most of the contact with the individuals at the train station is going to be with the agent at the window looking something like this, where you go to buy your tickets. The door on the right-hand side would normally be closed. We have that open because we share the space with Duluth Historical Society, and they have displays in there. So we actually have a pass-through there to go back into the freight room. We've got a wood banister so you can't get in the agent area. But normally, you would be in the waiting room, you go to the window, you conduct your business there. Remember, this is before credit cards and debit cards, so it's going to be cash. So you want some security there because money's going to be coming over that window. So just like at a bank, you want some security and whatever. So you would conduct your business there. You tell the agent where you want to go. They would look it up in their books, best routing if you want to go some long distance like California, and they would compute up the price and tell you, and they would issue you the tickets for your trip, and you would pay them right there at that spot, right there at the window there. And of course, you'd wait for your train and whatever. Behind you would be the waiting room. So that's where most of your contact would be. On the other side, some things you might not normally see would be some things like this. You might see on the agent side a ticket case. They had to have some kind of rack, some kind of enclosure to keep the tickets on, some kind of shelving or whatever. So this was quite common. You have those are actually called ticket chutes. You have a little cardboard ticket. Just take your thumb, pull the ticket down, and there's a little terracotta marble that would be behind that to put pressure on those tickets so they don't fall down flat like the one at the very top left has, because that's where I got the marble from. And then you would have some space back at the bottom for interline tickets, longer distance tickets, and miscellaneous things. So that would be a ticket case. That's going to be on the agent side. That's because that ticket stock's valuable. The agent has to account for that back with the auditor and with the company. You know, they're sequentially numbered, and they're going to be checking on that. Hey, we got something missing. You owe us some money. So he has to account for those. The ticket dater is on the right-hand side, and that would have a dial in there would say the name, the town, city, wherever it is, and you have the little roll of things on the side there. You set the date. It has an inked roll that goes over it, and they would stamp the ticket to validate it. And so that was quite common, and that's something else that you would see inside the depot. Of course, that's going to be back behind the counter. One time I found that sitting on that agent's counter. I said, hey, let's move that back so somebody doesn't take it. Those things are quite valuable, yeah.
Would the ticket case have like a timbre door? And
yes, it actually has a roll-down door. It rolls down, and there's a key lock on it. Right, I forgot to add that detail. Yeah, so it actually locks up because the agent is responsible for those. Like I said, there's serial numbers. The auditor is going to come out. That's what Bob Hanson, he was a traveling auditor. He would go out and have to check those tickets. You know, okay, you know, last time you sold through ticket 1, okay, where's 2 now, you know, and check on each one of those, each of those locations. So yeah, they have to account for all those.
What year was that?
On what?
On those tickets?
The tickets, they would have used those. I mean, the Georgia Railroad actually had mixed trains into the 80s, but they pretty much quit selling tickets like that probably late 60s or so, kind of 60s, early 70s, something like that. After that, you pretty much would pay on the train to the conductor. But they actually did have those tickets would have been into probably the 60s or so. And then they pretty much phased those out at each individual station. In fact, they did away with those actually buying them at the individual station. That's a good question, but yeah, probably into the 60s maybe. So, but that would have been back before. Obviously, the passenger operations are going to be, for the most part, most stations back, except for unless you have an Amtrak station, are going to be, back, 60s, 50s, and back further. Okay, other questions? All right, we'll come back to the other way then. All right, let's talk a little bit about train operations. That second part of the three things that they do at a depot. This is a picture at the Decatur Depot, Georgia Railroad. About 1980, the agent there, operator at the time, was Mr. Glover, and that's a picture of what we call the operator's bay. And he has that's the bay window area, and that's so he can look both sides of the tracks, one way or the other. And on his left, he's got accordion phone, scissors phone. It's expandable, so it will come out. It's on a swivel thing, so he can move that phone wherever he wants it. He's got a set of earphones actually sitting on top of that he can put on his head so he can listen. He's got some train orders and messages up there on those little clips strung up in front, messages he needs to keep up with. Then on his right, kind of under his chin, is a radio. This is, like I said, 1980, so radios have come in. So that's there. Of course, you've got miscellaneous forms, paperwork, and whatever. To his right, you've got a couple large levers, and that's to operate that train order. Trains coming in will know that they need to pick up train orders or not. And so you'd have the mast there with the signal, semaphore signal, and that's how you actuated it actually inside the depot. You would have some kind of lever system to raise and lower those arms. And so that's what's right behind it. So that's kind of basically what it looked like. In earlier times, we'd have a telegraph, and we'll take a look at that just in a moment here.
What would be the date of that picture?
That picture's about 1980. Yeah. Well, it's black and white, that's the reason. But yeah, that picture's about 1980. Yeah. Yeah, at that time, he had been an agent. He was just an operator at that time because they no longer had agents. So he was just an operator at that time.
You said order, that lever does the orders for the train. What do you mean by orders for the train?
We're going to cover that in just a moment.
Good.
Good question, yeah. I'm going to show you a train order, and we'll talk about that a little more. Just coming up real quick here. Good thought. All right. Now, just before that, now he had a phone and a radio. Of course, predating that, everything was done by telegraph. So we have on the left there a telegraph key, and that's that, that click, click, click stuff. That stuff. So you would send a message, using a telegraph key, but then someone had to receive it. And so you had on the right-hand side what's called a sounder, and it's actually often a wooden box called a sounder box. And this one's actually attached to the side of the wall, and it's got some swivel arms so you can position that sounder box wherever you want to. So you're sitting there at that table, and you can position it however you want to. The little wooden box helps focus that sound so you can hear that tap, tap, tap stuff better, the dots and the dashes. Sometimes they even improve the sound more. They might take a Prince Albert can and cut that open and kind of put it behind there, and then kind of project the sound even more. On the Georgia Railroad, I understand it was always a Prince Albert can. So there were no other brands. I always used Prince Albert. All right, and those are both actually in our depot there at the Southeastern Railway Museum in our operator bay area. So that's what the little gizmo is called, the sounder, and the enclosure around it, and the arm is the sounder box. Sometimes that may be on a pole, a little, like about 6 inches tall, and I might just screw it down the desk, and that could be on like about a 5 or 6 inch little pole, and then the box will be sitting on top of that. So you can see them both ways. Telegraphs went out 60s, 70s kind of. Sometimes they left it in place. I think Georgia Railroad left the system in place for a while as a transition to telephone. It's kind of a fallback backup kind of system. So machinery might have still been in place, but it may not have been in use. So that's kind of, over time these things have changed.
And who were they calling?
Do what?
Who were they calling? The other train stations?
It would be the dispatcher. Would be like on Georgia Railroad, you'd have an engineers called dispatcher, and they're the ones that are actually telling the trains when to leave at each location and when to arrive somewhere. And they would have been based either in Atlanta or Augusta, and so they would telegraph, let's say Madison, and tell Madison you need to give train orders to this train that's coming. And so they would tap that out. Now they would not tap out the full word Madison. There was probably like a 2-letter abbreviation, which I don't know what it was, but they would tap it out, and you'd have to be listening for it, because actually you would be listening in on other people's conversations too. So you have to listen. Oh, this is for me, Madison, and then you would have to write it down, and then you would relay that back to the dispatcher. You would back, and then the dispatcher, if that was correct, would say complete at the bottom. You got your word complete down there, and then they would put the time and either initials or last name of the dispatcher. The dispatcher was the one that would initiate the conversation, in fact, over the telegraph, and they would tell Madison, I've got a train order for you, and here's the train order, and give them the information. We've got one here from 1941. This is at Covington, and it's telling the train to meet at a different location than what it's normally supposed to. And what the dispatcher would do is they'd be keeping up with where the trains are at. And they would see this train is getting delayed for whatever reason, mechanical problem or whatever. I've got an opportunity to run another train around, keep it moving. And so that's an operation they might do to make things run better on the railroad. And so they would do that through a train order. Now, this was before webcams and GPS, folks, and of course before radio, normally being used on the railroads. So the local depot was the eyes and ears for the dispatcher. And so you had a lot of little towns. Sometimes there'd be not much of a town there, but they needed an operator there, someone to be watching to see what's going on with the trains. And so when the train would come into that town, they would send off a message to the dispatcher to tell them the train has gotten here, the train has departed. And I've got a book over there that's actually what it is. It's the train record of movements in Covington, and I've got it bookmarked for September 17th, 1941. And they've got the time the train came in, what the train was, and when that train departed. And so by doing that, that would be telegraphed to the dispatcher. They write it down on their master sheet, and then they know what's going on out there. Is everything running on time, or do I need to take some kind of action? And the action would be the train order. To make things run better, they would issue this train order. And then to get the train order actually to the train crew, of course they would pull those levers that we saw in that black and white picture, and that would tell the telegraph, the semaphore, that so when the train was coming, they say, oh, we got to pick up train orders. And then when they come by, somebody would hand up something like this. This is the older style, and you got the train order sitting here on a clip, and they would pick this up like this. Wow. Put their fist through it like this, and hopefully they aim correctly, right? Now this one looks like it was kind of chewed off. It may have been longer at one time. We just got one yesterday at the museum. It was donated to us, and it was about right here. That would be pretty close to be the train. This is pretty close right now to a train passing by. But they actually just put their, it would pick it up, they would take the order off, and then just sling that out the window. So then the operator would have to go back and pick that up later when they had nothing to do. So right after World War II or so, they improved that with a high-speed stick, and now you have a string that you're aiming for, and the same thing is you're going, train's going to come by, you go grab it, but now you're just grabbing the string, which you see comes off pretty easily, and the train order. And so that's a better invention there, to pick up that train order. That way the train doesn't have to stop. Now many years ago they would stop on certain train orders, but in the later years I think they did away with those forms even. And so they would just pick them up as a train went by. Of course you'd have to do this twice. You have to do it once for the conductor, of course at the end of the train, conductor, brakeman, and at the front of the train for the engineer, fireman. So you'd have two of these set up. And so you'd have at least a pair of these. And quite often these strings, in fact, I learned how to do this. I happened to see the strings, and I just picked up this out of Crawfordville. when we went to Greensboro, I saw a bunch of strings hanging on the desk. Because I realized what it was, I asked the guy, and so he actually showed me how to string the string.
What is the name of that?
It's called a train order fork. It's a train order hoop.
Train order
Hoop.
fork.
Yeah, this is actually a high-speed fork, I think is what the technical name is, but train order hoop, H-O-O-T.
And the other was a train order.
They're both train order hoops. That's the simplest thing to call it a train order hoop. Yeah,
That's, that's their send button.
that's right. Yeah. So once the conductor and the engineer picked up the train orders, then they know they got to make changes in what they're supposed to do. The orders are on that. So that's what that is. So that's how you get it to that moving train going by. All right. Another thing you might know about, I didn't know about it until about 2 or 3 years ago. Look at that chair closely, especially the bottom of the legs. What do you see? Glass insulators. As best I can tell, this was a universal practice all over the U.S. I've seen pictures from Arizona, Minnesota, West Virginia. I know for Bob Hansen, it was all over the Georgia Railroad. In fact, this past week, I saw an article, Google Books, I think it was 1910 or so, Popular Science recommended telegraph operators and radio operators to put insulators on the bottom of their chairs so they don't get electrical shocks for the wires coming in, particularly like a thunderstorm. That glass is fairly smooth, makes it easier to move that chair around on the floor. Now, there's some things, I've seen a few things on the internet, they don't think that's right about the electrical shock, but most everything says that it is. So if you look for insulators, I didn't know this until like I said a couple, 3 years ago. If you go out and look for insulation, normally they would have a curved top, right? But if you got one that's all scuffed up and maybe kind of a flattened top, it used to be on the chair. Now this particular chair here, we didn't know about it. So I immediately started looking around our museum. If we got an old chair, we can make into one of these. So I found it was painted gray, office gray, battleship gray, So our wood wizard, our chief carpenter, he stripped the thing, citrus strip, restained it, and carved and put on those insulators. Fortunately, we had insulators. We got those in stock, and we made us one. So this is something that you might want to make, put in your display. I already spotted you had a chair that looked something like that up there at Central Georgia Depot, so you might want to, you may want to think about this. I was already looking, I saw one. They may have arms or not, but they, both ways. I've seen them with arms and without. Rather. So it's up to the operator. And what Bob Hansen and I kind of talked about, we kind of think that this might have been something that the operator did themselves. This was not railroad issued. So it's a possibility the insulators may not have matched. If they did it themselves, it may have just been insulators they picked up as they found them. And so some of them might be Western Union, and some of them might be their railroad. And like here in Madison, you got two railroads right together. Some of them might have been Georgia Road, and some of them might have been Central of Georgia. So you might, if you find two insulators and two of some other, it could be okay. It may be okay. I don't know. So anyway. But it's kind of conjecture on our point. It may have been a railroad issue. We just don't know for sure. But anyway, it's an interesting little thing. I didn't know about it until, like I said, a couple, 3 years ago, started doing some research and insulators on the end of chair legs. I'd seen pictures and never had picked up on that detail. All right. My little tidbits here then. All right, well, the third thing we got to talk about, of course, is things, moving freight. Of course, that's the mainstay of the railroads, and that's what keeps them business today is freight. So, but moving things. So, the main thing you want to move, of course, the moneymaker, is moving a whole carload of something. So, obviously, Madison in the day, cotton would have been the thing. So, you would have moved a carload of cotton, say, Madison to Macon, go to bib manufacturing, and so you would have generated by the railroad what they call a waybill, and that will have the instructions of where the car is going to go, and the pricing, what you're going to charge, and what the car is, and various information. Now back at that time, this is before computers. So we have what we call agency billing, agency accounting. The billing was actually done at the local depot. So the Madison depot would have actually done the way bill. They would have done all that work there. The pricing would be in books called tariff books, and they would have to go in those books and look at, find that commodity in those locations and whatever, and look up all those prices and put that in there. Now a lot of times probably what they did, if it's a recurring shipment, they'd probably go back and pull the one they just did a couple weeks ago and just base everything off that. That'd be the quickest way to do it. But you know, if it's a new shipment, new place or whatever, then you have to do a little extra work to get it there. But the car can't move because a copy of that has to go to the conductor to move that car on the railroad. So one copy goes there, of course, and that fact says copy on there. Of course, every one went to accounting and whatever, and wherever else. So that's for your long distance, your whole carload freight. And so like I said, you want to move that cotton to Macon. The closest way, of course, is over the central of Georgia. That's the shortest route. But that may not have been the busiest route. Maybe they didn't have that many trains a day. And so you might have had a situation, Georgia Road saying, well, we got more trains running. We'll take it to Atlanta. We'll put it on Southern Railway overnight, and we can get it to Macon in the morning, and we'll do it for the same price as if you went straight. And so you got competition here, right? And so things like that would happen. So some of that freight would still go a lot further going to Atlanta and back down to Macon. It's quite possible it was done, particularly if the shipper was already on the Georgia Railroad. Georgia Railroad would want to keep their business. So things like that happen, but obviously you got advantage there with competition. You know, hey, you know, if I send on the Central, it's a lower price. So that kind of things happen. So you had a real advantage here by having the two railroads. Helped on your prices. Whereas if you went just a few miles one way like Rutledge, you only got one railroad, they're a captive audience. It's Georgia Railroad or nothing. So it made a difference here. All right, so second part was express. Of course, at that time, Railway Express was popular, but earlier on, like the 1800s, American Express, guess what they did? Express shipments. That was your FedEx, UPS overnight at the time. And so these were expedited shipments, and they kept them secure. Extra security, extra locks and whatever. You had to sign extra for it. So this is where they deliver it to the house, but you got to sign for it. You know, it's not they just drop it off at the front door or by the garage. They ring the doorbell and you got to sign for it. It's you know, this is serious stuff. You pay more for it. But the Express was a very integral part of the agent operations. And so you would have a separate area usually in the freight house. In fact, I looked at a couple of places in that Central Georgia depot that I kind of think may have been Express at one area. There was one place that looked like they may have had a wire fence enclosure. That's a possibility. There was a little room over in the corner. That looked like it was a possibility too. And then I understand that part of the colored waiting room may have been used for Express also at later times. So usually it's a more secure area, and they're going to sign for it to come in and sign for it to go out. It's more money charged for it, more money for the railroad. And then at LCL, less than carload. And you see that in evidence in your Central Georgia depot because they've got these areas in there and they've got business names in there. And so a lot of the popular shippers, say like a hardware store, they don't need a boxcar full of hammers. They only need half a dozen or a dozen at a time, right? So that's where the less than carload comes in. The carload of hammers goes to Beck and Gregg in Atlanta, a large hardware wholesaler that sold all over the Southeast. Beck and Gregg would pull out half a dozen or a dozen and ship those to the hardware store here in Madison. And so that's where the less than carload comes in. That's your smaller shipments. That's your FedEx, UPS, ground type stuff. Whereas the Express is going to be the overnight stuff. But very important in the early days on the railroads, the less than carload business, that's why you had that freight house attached on both of the depots, is this was bread and butter business for them. But over time, obviously, there's a lot of moving stuff in and out, small items. That became more and more went to the truck lines, and so it was phased out on the railroads. But back in the day, you know, 50s and back, less than carload was important. right, let's change gears here. We'll talk a little bit about the Georgia Railroad, and we'll talk about the Central a little bit too. Got a map there. The Georgia Railroad went on the right-hand side from Augusta, went towards the west there to Atlanta, right in the middle of the picture. And then we had two related railroads, Atlanta West Point and Western Railway of Alabama. Atlanta West Point went from Atlanta to the state line, and then the Western Railway of Alabama from state line to Montgomery and then over to Selma. And so those three railroads had a kind of joint ownership. They were kind of separate and kind of not, so kind of both. So they had some things they shared and some things they kept separate. All right, key dates. 1833, incorporated. That's when the Georgia Railroad was actually incorporated as a state. I had it coming in 1840. Was that 40 or 41 that you had that letter someone had earlier?
41.
It was 41, okay. So I'm off there by a year or so. So let's, because that's good information there. So I should have actually 1841 there. So we built into Madison, and at that time the plan was the Georgia Railroad was to go from Augusta to Athens, and Madison was a branch line, and that's all was planned, was just to go to Madison and stop. Well, during that time, about 1840 or so, they started changing ownership of the Georgia Railroad. They had a lot of Athens people owned it beginning with, but then over time, people in Augusta started taking over the railroad. And the state of Georgia decided to build what was called the State Railroad, and some things, what became the Western Atlantic Railroad. And the state decided to build this from some little place about 6 miles west of Decatur. Decatur didn't want it. So this place called Terminus and later Marthasville. And so people with the Georgia Railroad decided maybe we need to build to this place and maybe that would stir up some more business for us, because it's going to go from this Terminus place up to Ross's Landing, which became Chattanooga, Tennessee. Maybe that might be something good to connect to. So along in that time, they decided we're going to go ahead and build to Atlanta, what became Atlanta. 1843, kind of related to that, the Georgia Railroad had an engine called the Florida, and the Western Atlantic Railroad in Atlanta needed an engine. So the Georgia Railroad sold the Florida. The problem was there was no Georgia Railroad from Madison to Atlanta. So they had to ship it by wagon. And that's a picture of what it might have looked like. Now I've seen one artist drawing where it shows that entire engine being shipped behind a bunch of horses. I don't think that's probably what they did. That the smokestack is sheet metal. You know, we didn't have pole chainsaws and guys that would chin you up with the chainsaw to cut off those limbs, so I think they would have taken that off. And those wheels are pretty heavy. I think they've taken those off. I don't want to belittle what they did, but I think they would have wanted to reduce about 13 tons there a little bit. So it may have been several wagons. But still, it's pretty amazing from Madison to Atlanta over dirt roads, and everybody's been to Atlanta, so you know it's like that, right? By wagon power, that's pretty amazing. So I don't want to belittle it. Now, the reason I picked the Florida, this is 49 years BA, before football. I think there was some other reason, the condition of the engine or something like that. I don't think football was the reason for the sale. So I'm sure that was already going through several people's mind. Why did they have a Florida engine in Georgia? No, that's not the reason. But pretty amazing from Madison that was shipped. All right, the railroad got to Atlanta, 1845. And then come into our more recent times, in 1982, the Georgia Railroad was sold by the bank. It became a bank back in the 1800s. The bank sold the railroad to what became the CSX Railroad in 1986. So there's kind of some basic facts there. Hey, more people a lot of dates, but some people, they need that timeline and some dates. So that's just kind of some interesting ones there. All right. We have here a mixed train. A mixed train on the railroad has both passengers and freight on the same train. So we have on the left there, that's the front of this train. It's Georgia Train 108, mixed train, April 1980. Looks like a freight train on the left when you see the front. On the back, oh, we got some passenger accommodations. You've got passenger car and you've got a caboose which has some passenger seats in it. We have a caboose similar to that at the Southeastern Railway Museum, and we have passenger seats in it. And so that's, yes.
We had a passenger car come through here till about 1975, but they wouldn't let us get on it.
Well, you could, this is the one. This is the same train.
Yeah.
You'd have to have it flagged. You'd have to contact the dispatcher in Atlanta, and they would have, you tell them, I want to be picked up in Madison, and arrange for them to stop and get you in Madison. Now, sometimes they have a large freight train. They would not stop it. Bob Hansen several times was the passenger train. He was a traveling auditor, but several times he was told to drive to Augusta and go to every station and be there at whatever time the train was supposed to be there. If there's someone who wanted to ride, they went in his car. Because they didn't want to stop a 100-car freight train that came through like a little while ago today. So that did happen. But this continued on for several years, and I'll show you another picture yet in just a moment here. And I got to ride most of these. These trains, you see me, I'm in the dark shirt getting ready to get off that caboose, 1980. The main line, Atlanta to Augusta, you had the mixed trains. You also had them on the Washington branch, Barnett, and I put exit 154 in parentheses. Barnett is not on the map. How many people know where Barnett is? Oh, good. Since it's not marked.
That's where the Georgia Woodlands connects with.
That's Georgia Woodlands today, but at that time it was, of course, Georgia Railroad. Correct. Basically, last time I was out there, a handful of houses. There used to be a church out there, I think. You turn to the right, you go to Warrenton. You turn to the left, you're in downtown Barnett. You had the Macon Road, Camac to Macon. I only rode Atlanta as far as Milledgeville. And then the Athens branch, Union Point to Athens. Of course, that was at one time supposed to be the main line at Union Point to go to Athens. And that all ended in 1983. But up until then, you could ride on one of these trains if you could find it. So. Central Georgia, we'll cover that real quick. Got a map here. Macon is right there in the middle of the map, and you go straight north, and you go to Athens, and that's the line with Madison on it. Started out as a Covington and Macon Railroad, got to Madison about 1888, Athens the following year, but it was sold in 1891. It had a lot of financial problems. And I've got a timetable there that Covington and Macon Railroad. They're showing just one, I think it's just one passenger train each day, each way. Became Macon a Northern Railway then, 1891. And then it was sold to Central Georgia in 1895. Still had financial problems all during that time. So, and then I've got a timetable there, which has actually two trains, I think, at Madison going to Athens at that time. Only one going all the way through, both ways, but two. There was one Madison to Athens also. So they were sold to the Central Georgia Railway, and I've got a timetable there from about 1900. It shows one passenger train each direction. 1930s, there were two trains a day, and that lasted maybe until about World War II. Then it went back to one, and then about 1950, 52, somewhere in there, it went to mixed train for a while, that combination passenger and freight, and then somewhere early 50s, no more passenger trains on the line. Exactly when, I don't know. Coming forward a little later, Southern Railway bought the Central Georgia in 1963. They retained the name and so on, but its stuff would still be lettered Central Georgia, but it would be in Southern Railway paint scheme. That Southern Railway merged in and became the Norfolk Southern in 1982. Squaw Creek came in as a lessee, operated the line 2008 until 2014, and then now currently it is Cater Perry is the current operator for the line. Don't know too much about what engines were used on the line. I haven't found too many pictures. This is a possible engine, a very common size. It's this is Central Georgia number 1571. It's a 440 American. It's called an American on a railroad. You got, if you look under the cylinders, there's two wheels on one side, two on the other, so that's your first four. You got 2 driving wheels this side, 2 on the other side, so that's the second 4. Nothing behind, so it's a 4-4-0, and that's called an American. Very common engine in the 1800s, early 1900s. Good chance this type of engine was used through Madison. Then I did see another picture indicating engines of this size may have run through here into the maybe 40s or something. This is a little larger engine. This is a 282 Mikado, but possibly a type that could have operated through Madison. And again, that one you've only got 2 wheels on the front. You got 4 driving wheels on each side and 2 underneath the cab. So it's a 282, and it's called a Mikado. Some railroads call them MacArthur's during World War II. All right, we have a map here. 1923. This one of the Central Georgia publications that were republished by the Central Georgia Historical Society. It showed textile plants, and there was this blue oogles of them at that time, back in the 20s. Particularly the line here, they're all concentrated up at the top of the line around Athens. So you got plants in Athens, Whitehall, Watkinsville, and Bishop. Doesn't show anything in between there, but obviously all those shipped down through Madison going to Macon, because Macon was the central hub of the railroad. But at one time, it looks like considerable traffic would have been textile plants. Today, of course, the railroad's been cut back. Basically, it operates to Bishop. The line in between is this kind of embargoed, this kind of bush and tree and whatever. The rails are still there, but I don't think there's been in operation for a long time. Now, there was a period back in the late 70s, early 80s, it looked like Southern Railroad was making a bypass railroad, and they really fixed up the track quite a bit. And then next time I came through, a few years later, it was like it is now, growing up weeds and whatever. Let's talk a little bit about when our depots were built. And this may be one of those things maybe y'all can educate me some, because I've seen some different things and some websites and whatever. All right, right-hand side, Central Georgia, early 1900s. I think 1901 looks like is a pretty good date, talking with Joe earlier today. Looks like 1901 is a pretty firm date. They've got the actual plans, and they've got some notes on there, so it looks like 1901. So I think that's and that's on some websites, it's 1901. I think that's a definite. Maybe a little more confusing on the Georgia Railroad. I've seen 1841. I've also seen 5758. The 5758 comes from a book, The Courthouse and the Depot, and the author in there discounted the 1841. He was referring to some book that said the Georgia Railroad built some brick depots, replacing wood depots in that time frame. Okay, that sounds plausible. Then I started looking about John Byron Walker, who I didn't know who he was. Now I do. Built one of your very nice homes here. And on his plantation, he could make brick. And he built that home, Bonner Hall, in about 1839 out of brick. Oh, well, he certainly could have built the depot, and he did, in fact, build the depot. Question exactly when. He was also a Georgia Railroad director, and he built your second courthouse in 1844. So what is the consensus here? Was the depot all built at all one time, maybe in a couple of sections? Do we have anything, do y'all have anything more exactly when it was built?
I don't know.
It was built in sections. If you look at it, you can see the break between the front and the back.
So it was built in sections?
At one point it had a 2-story.
Oh, okay, okay.
The front section that's closest to Jefferson was built in the early 20th century as an extension.
Okay.
But it was a much shorter depot.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, then if it's built in sections, then it sounds more and more quite possible he did build something original. Unless, I mean, if y'all found anything as far as newspaper or anything else. Okay. Well, it's quite possible that he did build part of that original one, 1840, 1841. When it first came in town. Very quite possible if you did. So that's interesting information. One thing I thought was interesting, there was that Antique magazine article, I think 2009, and they had some quotes in there out of his journal books he kept for his farm. And I'm wondering if there's anything in those plantation books.
I was just wondering.
You want that too?
Yeah.
It says some family member still has those.
Alex Newton has them.
Yeah, if they could look through those and see, because I would think, details looked like he would have made some notes in there, made X number of bricks or sent crew of X number of men to build depot or something. I just have a feeling that might be in there. It'd be interesting to find out. All right, well, I just wanted to throw that out there and see what kind of education I could get on this point. So, all right, we'll wrap up this couple of depots here. Farmington, 1972, I was there. That's my photo. Fortunately, it's been preserved a lot better today, so, but that's what it looked like in 72. And then there's Rutledge also on that same day, went through there. And the sign I was talking about, the train bulletin sign, is just to the left of that first window.
Yes.
You see the door, the window, and that sign. It's actually sitting on a metal, like a rectangular metal frame.
Do you have a date on the Rutledge Depot?
Do what?
A date on Rutledge, when it was built?
No, I don't have a date on it. No.
I've yet to see one.
Yeah, I don't know when it was built. I just took the picture. Like
They
I
don't
said.
know either. That's
Yeah,
why.
they don't know either. Well, that looks like a later design in at 57, 58, so I would think this is probably more like a 1900s type build. Yeah, that would be my guess. Yeah, 1900s type, but I don't know. That's just a guess on my part. All right.
Just for what it's worth, on the other side of the depot, there's a mural. I think the conductor on the train throwing a biscuit to Richard Hubbard, who's the town painter. And Richard is the little black guy standing there.
Oh, okay.
Railroad tracks, waiting for the biscuit.
All right, well, any other questions or comments then? All right, well, I appreciate everyone's attention today, and hopefully there's been something here to be of interest to you.
I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
There's so many ways now that they can prevent accidents, you know, trains being on the same track. Or what did they do at that time to prevent, if they were changing the time and changing the arrival and so
Some
on?
train orders.
That's it?
That's it. It was the train order.
Those
Dispatcher on their sheet would have it marked down. This train is supposed to be here, and it's supposed to be there at a certain time or whatever. You're supposed to meet or whatever. And it was by train order. And what would happen when somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do, then they would go back. They would keep copies of those train orders. Did somebody not get the order? Did they not follow the order?
These little things that were passed,
This was a little piece of
for
paper.
prevented accidents?
That was the purpose for it. But if somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do, you know, or made a mistake, then yeah, problems would arise. Yes, sir.
There were other railroad lines in the county. Like at one time, one went from Appalachia to
Right, the Green County Railroad. Yes,
Were those private lines?
No, that was a common carrier also. I was going to cover that, but I said I don't have the time to. But the Green County was a common carrier, just like the Georgia Railroad, central of Georgia. It never got to Green County. It went to Appalachia and it went west. But it was there. I wanted to cover it also, but I ran out of time. As you can see, I'm at my allotted time, close to it. So, but a good question. Yeah, that's another story too on that Green County Railroad. Does that answer your question? Other questions, comments? All right, well, I appreciate everybody's attention, and come out and see us at the Southeastern Railway Museum. If you want to see me, though, you'll probably have to come down to the shop, because that's where I normally am on Saturdays. Our library is also down there also. It's not open to the public. It's really more of an archive than a library. But anyway, come out and see us. We have a 35-acre track. We've got almost 100 pieces of railroad equipment. And we're Georgia's Transportation Museum. We do have other things. We have a 1935 taxi cab, Pontiac, that I get to drive occasionally. So we do have some fun stuff. So come out and see. Yes, sir.
This work order system seems to be kind of a risky way to do business. How often did the wrong train end up on the wrong track with another train?
It happened. It happened.
All wrecked.
Yeah, it was the best they could come at the time. Like I said earlier, there was no webcams, so you had to depend on somebody out there, the local train station, to say this train's been here and left, so you know where they were at then, but they haven't got this other place yet. So you know they're somewhere in between there.
Yeah, that's fine until it's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
You don't fall asleep at the switch.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like Casey Jones, I think everybody's probably heard of that story. The problem there was the train that was working there had left some cars on the track. They were supposed to already be out of the way, and they weren't. And Casey Jones, they were supposed to be out of the way, so he barreled on through and hit about 6 cars, and of course derailed and killed himself. The cars were not supposed to be out. They were supposed to already be gone. They were supposed to be gone by a certain time, and they didn't keep up with their time. They made a mistake, and people died. So that was the problem with the train order system, and that was the best they had at the time. You had to follow it. Everybody had to follow it, the times and everything else.
If anyone wants to read more about train accidents, you go on the Morgan County Library, the Uncle Remus Library website. They have the Madisonian and daily and weekly Madisonian scan for years back in the 19th century. And the frequency and all the goings on at the depot were just common news reportage in those papers. But in doing the research on the Central Georgia Depot, sort of went down that hole and pulled anything I could find in Central Georgia, including all the wrecks. The frequency of the wrecks is surprising, and the speed with which they got a train off and out of the way so that they could open it up again was kind of remarkable as well. But people got hit by trains all the time, and it was always reported. When a new station agent came, it was reported. When nothing happened at the depot, it was reported.
Slow day at the depot.
There's one example where the Georgia Railroad went on strike, and the Central was the only way that you could ship out of Madison. So it's the most important place of business in Madison right now is the Central Depot, and it was for that very reason that they were all coming to ship from regions around. But so there's a lot of train information that's in the paper. You just have to look for it. Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you, everyone. I'll turn it back over to the next.